Greetings, dear listeners. This is Jonah Goldberg, host of the Remnant podcast, brought to you by the Dispatch and Dispatch Media. I am just full warning. We'll try to edit out any coughs, sneezes, or fainting spells. But I was under the weather over the weekend. I am not 100% yet, but I'm exceedingly medicated and caffeinated. So we'll see how this goes. Very excited to have a return guest on today. Some of you know I recently listened to that interview at the New York Times with Curtis Yarvin about how dictatorship is awesome, and was so underwhelmed. And while I was writing about that, I saw a great piece by Alex Tabarrok, he's a professor of economics at George Mason University and the co-blogger in chief for Marginal Revolution with Tyler Cowen, and one of my favorite economists. We have some marginal disagreements, but again, that would make sense for the guy who runs a thing called Marginal Revolution. And he did a really good piece on it, and I was like, it's been a long time since I had Alex on, so let's have Alex on, and we can talk. We can start with the Yarvin stuff, and then just sort of take it where we want. So, Alex, welcome back to the Remnant.
Great to be here. Yeah, the Yarvin stuff was quite funny. I think both of us agreed. All the good stuff is in liberal fascism. You did a much better job.
I appreciate that. Thank you. So one of the things that kind of fascinates me about this, longtime listeners and readers know I have this thing about how I don't like talk about new ideas, not because I'm against new ideas. It's just that most of the people who push new ideas as new are playing a shell game with you because, in fact, they're not new, right? This idea that we need a CEO or a monarch, or that democracy doesn't work and that capitalism is inefficient and you need someone in the center running things. This is a very friggin' old idea. In fact, older than democracy and capitalism and all of that. What is your theory about why it just keeps coming back? Because I find it so exhausting, and all it is it's new coats of paint on very old, arguments.
Yeah. I think there's two things. I think just sort of you look around at the democratic world and it's kind of messy. It's kind of chaotic, right? And it's also true when you look at markets, right? They say messy, chaotic, things are going up, things are going down. No one knows what's going on. And there's kind of this natural impulse, which, James C. Scott talks about, like seeing like a state.
Right.
Okay. And what does the state want to do? Well, they want to order things. They want to make things legible. They want everything in rows, right? And so they want to control the economy just, aesthetically, they want everything in such and such. And the same thing is true with democracy. Certainly, I sometimes get, as we all do, frustrated at how long it takes things to get done in a democracy, and we have to do this thing called compromise. I don't like compromise, right? And so I think there's kind of this natural impulse to think, if it only would be better if someone were in charge. We need somebody to take control. But as you say, that's like a totally old pre-Enlightenment idea, and we know very well that it doesn't work. But we have to overcome sort of our natural impulses to, who's the biggest guy? Let's make him the leader of the tribe. Right. Let's bow down to that guy and put him in charge. We got to overcome that.
When you say it doesn't work, I'm totally open to the idea that it can work for a while, right? You can get a Lee Kuan Yew. He does some impressive things. It's the problem is the replacement issue. Right, it's like you're the economist. It's not at scale, but it's in terms of it. The problem is the long-term play, right?
Sure.
Is like, how do Frederick the Great was really impressive as a true monarch, right? He woke up every morning. He had mustard and coffee for breakfast, mustard in his coffee for breakfast, and started working over his paperwork at 4 a.m. and he ran the country, but he also ran it like a military platoon. I don't think any of whether he was as good as people say he was and all that. My point is like, so what? You can't replace him. And the guy who comes next sucks at it and makes everything worse. And yet, so do you think, it can't work even in the short term? Cincinnatus lays down his plow, 6 months in power kind of thing? Or is just the moral hazard of doing something like that not worth the return in the short term on that kind of move?
Right. I mean, I think there's actually a little bit of both. You're absolutely right that as I said in my post, Yarvin says we need to make the world run like Apple, right?
Right.
Have a CEO. Of course, he gets Apple completely wrong. Apple, after all, the CEO actually has to respond to the board of directors and the
Right.
shareholders. The shareholders literally vote, right? So, so the corporations are run much more like democracies than he thinks. But even putting that aside, yeah, I mean, I think you can sometimes have a great leader, a Steve Jobs, a Frederick the Great, a Lee Kuan Yew. Now, of course, Lee Kuan Yew was democratically elected.
Right.
For many, many years. People say, "Oh, Singapore," but Singapore, a modest democracy, you might call it at best. But he was certainly elected. But also, I think that you're absolutely right. It's the replacement factor which matters. Is the fact that when Apple does not do what we want, the Apple declines and goes out of business. Like Sony, has seen a massive decline in my era. Sony used to be the cool company, right, when I was a kid, and now it's more Apple. So that replacement is important. But I also think that we underestimate how well democracies actually choose leaders, particularly in tough times, right? Like Churchill. You're not going to get a better leader anywhere in the history of the world, really, than Churchill. I'd put him up against, Frederick the Great. You say, I don't know who's better, whatever. But Churchill was a great leader, but came through the democratic process. And in fact, even on issues like war, people have this idea that democracy is this effete, people who just consume goods and they don't produce anything and they become weak. But actually, the record of democracies in war is really pretty good. They throw up when times get tough, actually, democracies tend to do quite well.
So this argument used to be easier to make before the rise of China. Now I have my arguments about explaining the rise of China, which is that it wasn't the embrace of authoritarianism. The sort of Tom Friedman argument is China embraced authoritarian capitalism or one-party capitalism, and that's what made it work. And my view on that is the key word there is the capitalism, not the one party or the authoritarian, because they tried just plain authoritarianism until 1978, yes. And they killed tens of millions of their own people, right? And then when the markets work, people like Tom Friedman look at it and go, oh my gosh, it must have been the authoritarianism, which I think is kind of a tell on them. Nonetheless, it's not a free country, right? And it's had this incredible run. How do you think about China in terms of its demonstration effect? Does it, like, I don't understand why even stupid people admire Russia, but I can understand why even stupid people admire China, right?
Yeah.
They actually have results. What is your, if someone said to you, oh yeah, capitalism's so great, how do you explain China? What is your argument to them?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. And look, the first of all, China shows how bad communism is, right? Because, given it could have been this good, right? Under Mao, it was a complete disaster. And, in 1970, Chinese GDP per capita was, like $200, something like that. So that shows you, I think, the massive suppression effect of communism, great demonstration of how bad communism is. So the freeing up, even partially, of Chinese energy and Chinese initiative has generated this tremendous growth. Now, a lot of it is really just catching up growth because China, as I said, $200 GDP per capita, but they can look around the world and say, hey, there's a better way of doing things, which has been invented mostly elsewhere. Let's adopt those techniques. Let's build bridges and roads, and let's build modern society. And that is indeed what they did, massive savings rates, and they had this tremendous growth. Now, that growth right now is declining. That period is over. They're topped out. So I think their level of GDP per capita is going to top out somewhere like Mexico. Okay. We're a little bit fooled because China is just so big
Mhm.
that they can do so many of these fantastic demonstration projects, high speed rail and, sending people to the moon or stuff like that, which a small country could not do, even a small country with much higher GDP per capita. So this bigness, I think, kind of fools us a little bit. But Chinese GDP per capita, yeah, they're going to be fine. I don't think they're going to catch up to the US on GDP per capita precisely because they don't have as open and free an economy and society as we do. Now, maybe that will change, um, but it's the bigness rather than the GDP per capita, which I think we're a little bit fooled over. And of course, it has happened very quickly. But we've seen this story many times before. We saw the rise of Japan, and people said, "Oh, Japan's going to take over. They're buying Rockefeller Park." That was 20 years ago. Everyone was worried about Japan. I don't think we have that much to worry about China either.
So there's been a lot of talk lately about how since 1990, America, or since 2010, since like 1990 when the EU was formed, basically the American economy and the European economy were tied, with the European economy slightly bigger. And since then, I mean, I think this is a direct quote from The Economist, we've left Europe in the dust. And this sort of gets back to the point that you made, that I made when talking about Yarvin, is like, the question isn't how does Apple produce cool products, is how do countries produce companies like Apple, right?
Exactly.
What is your theory of the case about why Europe hasn't produced companies like Apple, right? I mean, sometimes it makes me want to cut myself when I hear European bureaucrats say that we're going to be the world superpower in regulation.
Yeah.
Really? That's something that's the quiet part you're really not supposed to say out loud. But what is, why is the American, comparatively, why is the American economy done so much better than, with the exception basically of Switzerland, which is tiny, these peer economic blocks have fallen so much further behind us? I mean, Canada is now basically, per capita wise, I mean, I think it's around it would be around the 48th or 49th poorest state in the United States. What explains all that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. And I'm not sure we have very good answers. Economists have been looking at this question, and yeah, I'm not sure we have great answers. I think a little bit, I would push back a little bit. Like, I don't count Europe out by any means. And I think they may get their act together. That has happened in the past. There's a little bit question of exchange rates and how do you measure and stuff like this. And maybe they're not quite so behind. But given that they are behind, I think there's two things. One is Silicon Valley, and that is partially American, I mean, for sure. But it's also its own special thing. And the fact that Silicon Valley is in the United States, I think that's not exactly an accident, but we can't sort of count on that happening too many times over and over again. So all of the big tech companies, right, they are Silicon Valley companies. So that's where most notably we are exceeding Europe, is in tech, is in high technology companies. And that's a pretty specialized thing. Now, why it happens to be there, and there's a bunch of questions. But I think we kind of got a little bit lucky. The second thing, we have just done much better on energy policy. And, I would say, thank God for fracking, right?
Yeah.
And the amazing thing about fracking is Europe could do it, and they're not, which is completely insane, right? I mean, instead of doing fracking, Europe is relying on imports from Russia, right? Which is, ridiculous. It's crazy. So America, again, and that wasn't so much a choice. That was about our peculiar land policy, where you can, one person could own the surface and another person could own the subsurface. And we just happened to have those rights and we went with it. And fracking could not be stopped, even though some administrations tried to stop fracking. But fracking, as you know, has made the United States the world's largest producer of oil, which to you and I, growing up, right? That would have
Right.
sounded, if you'd have said that,
Yeah.
the United States is going to be the world's largest producer of oil in the next century. People would have said you were insane.
Yeah. Although it's I don't want to get too much into the punditry, but and I have no team that I'm showing a rooting interest here for, but it was very annoying to me, like in the Republican primaries, straight through to the general election, Republicans constantly said, we're going to start pumping oil again. We're going to turn on the spigots. We're going to do all this stuff. And, you'd see ads from like Tim Scott saying that they shut down the oil and gas industry under Biden. They didn't. Right. But because the Republican base loved hearing that,
Yep.
Republicans said it, fair enough. And the Democratic base loved hearing that we shut all that stuff down. And Biden was terrified of saying, actually, that's not true, that we're actually producing more oil than ever. You had this sort of pas de deux of stupidity where both sides were lying to their own bases in a shared lie, right? And the reality is that Trump will do better things on energy on net, I think, than Biden did for sure, like the liquefied gas exports and all that kind of stuff. But there is a real continuity on a lot of these economic trends between administrations that our public discourse does not reflect, right? I mean, like the idea that like somehow everything was going right with the economy, then Biden got elected, everything was going wrong, and now that Trump's elected, that's kind of a medieval notion of how economics works. When we have a healthy king, the crops flourish, kind of thing.
Yeah. We have so many of these big lies, right? Like, not to upset too many people, but I mean, the best thing that the Trump administration did, in my view, in the first administration, the first Trump administration, was Operation Warp Speed, right? Was produce the vaccines. And yet, of course, the Republicans don't want to claim credit.
Right.
And the Democrats can't say, hey, you guys produced these terrible vaccines. So, on both sides, we get these strange lies.
Yeah. So it's funny. Like, all right. So I think Tip O'Neill's dictum that all politics is local is no longer really true. It's kind of a cliche now to say all politics is national.
Yeah.
And a lot of truth in that in terms of the way cable news and all that works. But it's funny. When it comes to economics, we tend to talk about things as if they're very, in the pundit world, in the politics world, as if they're very specific to that country. That here are these unique circumstances. Here are these unique policy decisions made by bad people or by good people that did X, Y, or Z. And then when economists come in, when the sort of the big picture economists come in and they look at these things, they're like, no, it's actually pretty simple. Here's this trend in macroeconomics across these countries and geopolitics and political economy. And it's like, you changed my thinking about education costs with the Bowles disease thing, which we don't need to necessarily revisit, but just simply that there are economic phenomena that do not end at the border and apply everywhere. And the reason I bring this up is I was speaking at a conference of financial planners, and I went and watched the guy who spoke before me, and he worked for one of the big brand name financial advisor places. And he was just basically like, look, countries get richer as they produce and consume more commodities. And he ran these charts, and it was pretty sort of matter of fact. If they get cheaper, you get richer. You consume more, they get cheaper because you're consuming more, blah, 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 blah. But then you go and you talk to people in the UK, and they're like, no, our problems are specific to these 5 policies, and they're things that Boris Johnson did or Keir Starmer is doing or whatever. Like, how do you, what's your heuristic for figuring out what is particular to a country's economy and what is kind of global? Like, how should a normal person think about these things?
Yeah.
Or am I wrong? I mean, you can say I'm wrong.
Yeah, no. I think, I think that's a good point. And like when you asked me about China, and my model for China is the solo model, which is a very simple model of economic growth, which just makes this distinction, which I had made between the catching up growth and the cutting edge growth. Mm-hmm. And China's good at catching up and won't be so good at cutting edge. So yeah, there are these kind of models which help you think about the world. And it is remarkable. So let me give you another example. It doesn't really answer your question, but it's the example I was been thinking about a lot. I did a podcast with Tyler on crime,
Mhm.
right? And again, just exactly as you say, people talk about all of these specific crime policies, and yet the crime rates basically increased and decreased in Canada and the United States at more or less the same time and same rates and so forth. So Canada also saw big increases in crime, not the same extent, but in the 1960s. And then you had this big decrease in crime later on. And yeah, so explaining what's going on, it's often much more difficult to explain when you have many countries, when you have to explain countries, because there's always some policy, right? There's
Right.
always some policy you can look to. So I think that is a challenge, and that's always a good thing, is to check with, what's going on in another country and see if the trends are similar, and then maybe, there are these, like the world culture, I think matters. It's not today. It's not just US culture. Twitter is everywhere. And so there's world culture as well as world economic trends. It's not just economics. I think we are having much more of a world culture than we used to.
Yeah, I mean, and another example of that is like student protest stuff, right? In 1968, you had major student protests in Cairo, in Prague, in Paris, in Mexico City, right? And like you can't claim that the politics were the same in all of those countries in 1968, right? And student protests in a communist country are by definition protesting against something very different than something in a democratic country, and yet that happened all over the place. And similarly, like when you try to figure out how to think about Trump and MAGA and all that stuff, obviously the people who think, obviously nationalists put a big premium on their own country, but there are these right of center and way right nativist and nationalist movements across the world right now. It's certainly it's a moment, it's a political moment for this kind of resurgence, and it makes it difficult to say, well, but for Trump's move on this wouldn't have happened. It feels more overdetermined, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, everywhere you look, there's been a backlash, partly against immigration, partly against COVID policies. But you're absolutely right. We see that in Italy. We see that in Germany, in Canada. I think Poilievre, I think, is going to win. So yeah, and I think there is a danger there in the Republicans and the Trump, group in particular, thinking, yeah, it's all due to us,
Right.
right? Because underneath the surface, I think that it's not as strong. I mean, Trump eked out an impressive victory, given how much of the mainstream media and so forth were against him. So it was impressive in that sense. But in terms of the actual numbers, it was quite. It was a margin. It was a close call. It wasn't a rout.
Yeah, he came in 44th in the history of the Electoral College, and he got 1.5. He beat Harris by 1.5%. It was decisive, but it wasn't a landslide, right?
Exactly.
Well, since you brought up immigration, you're one of these libertarian economists who thinks that borders for people don't make a heck of a lot of sense. And I guess you don't think borders for products make a heck of a lot of sense either. But and so we've talked about this before. I'm sure you've had a gazillion debates about all this. And it always seems to me, whether you agree with it or not, that the strongest argument against a open borders policy isn't an economic one. It's a political and cultural one, is that it creates backlashes. It's disruptive to social cohesion. And I'm just wondering, the last few years have kind of put that question to the test, and we've seen a lot of backlash, right? So like, do you give more credence now to that part of the drawback argument?
Yeah. So I would always say that, like, my view, as you say, is, ultimately I would like to see sort of open borders, sort of around the world, just as we have between states, in the U.S. But that's kind of always thought about that as kind of the end goal, towards which we should be moving, and perhaps moving there slowly. So I was never particularly surprised about the backlash. Um, I think the main thing to think about today is, look, if the United States is going to be a great power, and I want the United States to be a great power because I want there to be a capitalist, free market, open, free speech power, right?
Right.
I want those things to have a mark in the world, right? If we're going to do that, we need to have more people. Like not tomorrow, but ultimately, India has 1.4 billion people. China has about 1.4 billion. Okay. We've got, 300 and plus million people, right? So we want more Americans, right? And if you want America to have its place in the world, then ultimately there must be more Americans. Now, how we get there and, the balance between high skill and low skill and, how we manage that without too much social disruption, I think is a real question. But we have to be moving in that direction if we're thinking about the United States as being, a player in the world. Then ultimately, Matt Yglesias is sort of right. 1 billion Americans is something we should be thinking about. Again, not tomorrow, but that's where we should be heading.
So longtime listeners know that my standard response to the question of what when people ask me what's your preferred immigration policy, my answer is to have one.
Yeah.
And when pressed, I would like a more quote unquote generous immigration policy. More people. I have zero problem with focusing on highly skilled, all that kind of stuff. But whatever the number is, that should be the number. Because if you don't enforce the immigration laws, then you start to get the disruptive effect that we're talking about and a backlash, and then it becomes anti-legal immigration as much as it's anti-illegal immigration, and then that threatens any kind of generous immigration regime to begin with. So if you got to, with a heavy premium on political reality,
Yeah.
right? Where do you think the tolerance point is? What do you think the ideal immigration policy would be in the realm of the possible?
Yeah. So I think you're right that there was definitely a feel that the border was out of control, right? There was chaos on the border. And that fed a lot of discontent. And for the reasons we were talking about earlier about, legibility and so forth, people, they don't like to feel that their country is out of control, that things are, not being managed properly. Now, I think if we kind of shift the focus from immigration is great for the immigrants, which is something I have promoted, which is absolutely true. I mean, it's incredible for the immigrants. You could take somebody and from a poor country, from Honduras or something like that, bring them to the United States, and their wages go up by, a matter of 5 or 10. Okay. I think we need to shift from that and to more about we're going to manage immigration so that it's good for the United States, right? And yeah, we're going to have plenty of legal immigration, but it is going to be, Canada has a points system. We could talk about high skill immigration. We could have a lot more high skill immigration in the United States, including from places like Europe. Okay. So I would like to see, let's open up immigration. How about Canada, the UK, on Australia, New Zealand? Let's have the British, English, anyone who speaks English, right?
Yeah.
And like, I'm not, this is answering your question of
Sure.
political reality, but that kind of thing would be great. Let's have a free trade deal and an open immigration deal with all of the English speaking countries. I mean, we can throw in a few French and German too, but but that seems like totally doable and reasonable. And it seems like that is from a foreign policy perspective, that's the kind of thing we need to be doing and thinking about, democracy, free trade bloc,
Yeah.
right?
All right, switching gears a little bit. I have one of my greatest shortcomings on here is I've done absolutely nothing on cryptocurrencies
Mm.
and next to nothing, almost nothing on AI. And part of it is I feel like I have to comfortably understand something even to ask good questions about it. And I feel like I understand AI a little bit better than I understand crypto. So imagine that you have to go to a wedding, you don't know many people, and you get stuck at a table, you don't know anybody, and they say you're an economist, and somebody says, crypto, what the hell is that about? What's your answer?
It's about creating electronic money, which is as private as cash. So when the problem is, right, when if I send you a check or a debit or something like that, you got to go through the banking system,
Mhm.
and you need all of these third-party players.
It's super legible.
Super legible,
Yeah.
exactly, super legible. And that is what a CBDC, a central bank digital currency, makes it even more legible to the state.
Mhm.
So I'm very much in favor of Trump has said, we're not going to do a central bank digital currency. I think that's great because a central bank digital currency would literally give the government the all-seeing financial eye on every single transaction in the economy.
Mhm.
And, we know that governments will abuse this. Canada shut down the truckers, and said, look, we've known that people have been debanked in the United States. Oh, you're doing something, we don't like. We're going to shut you off from the banking system, even if it's perfectly legal. All of the government has to do is say, well, these guys look a little risky. And, the Fed has to manage banks to reduce risk. Therefore, a lot of people involved in selling marijuana, which is totally legal at the state level in many states, we're going to debank them, right? So they got to use cash, something like that. Anyway, so crypto just makes it possible to have electronic currency, which is as private as you and I exchanging cash. And I think it's very useful for that. The second advantage of crypto is that in addition to privacy, you can make money programmable. So you can have a digital money. Mark Andreessen said software is eating the world. So think about all of the things that we can do with a programmable money, which reduce transactions cost, make money flows evenly around the world more quickly, things of that nature. Like,
just explain programmable money for a
Yeah.
second, a little more.
Right. So, you could have a variety of contracts, so-called smart contracts, which can be executed via software instead of, executing them, through a banking system. You have it automatically done through software. So there's just a lot of things that one could reduce the transactions costs. So even, today, like the credit cards, that's like 2.5%. Okay. Credit card companies take about 2.5% of every dollar you spend. You spend $100, the seller only gets $97.50. Now that might not seem like a lot, but if you could cut that in a tenth, which maybe you could with crypto, that's a really big deal because payments are in the trillions.
Right.
So if you can, shave off a few percent on trillions of dollars of payments, that's a really big deal. So I think crypto has not yet. We're not there yet. It's taken a much longer to get this technology up and running, in part because it has been suppressed. But that is the promise or the hope of crypto.
Okay, so I'm with you on the no digital dollar. I've been there for a while, and I understand that point fine. And I will concede some of this is purely atmospheric on my part. First of all, the explosion of meme coins
Yes,
and
yes.
other crypto adjacent products
Yeah.
does not lend itself to the seriousness of this venture. Similarly, and I know just because you've swum in libertarian waters for a long time, I swam in conservative waters for a very long time. Sociologically, the number of people who 15 years ago, forget 50, would have been at one of these sort of Ron Paul adjacent Goldberg conferences have all gotten into crypto.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I didn't love their judgment when they were all pushing gold.
Yep.
And in some ways, crypto feels like crypto gold to me.
Oh, yeah.
In part because a lot of the arguments are the same. And then third, again, this is atmospheric more than anything else. Actually, it was the same guy I was telling you about before that I was listening to his presentation at the financial conference. He gave some number. He asked the audience to guess how many crypto products there were out, how many cryptocurrencies there were.
Yeah, yeah.
And he gave a number that I thought was just insanely high. Like I was expecting there to be like dozens.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's like 68,000 or something like that. And then, or that's what he said. And then I Googled it, and you would get these ranges of there are an estimated 28,000 to 114. I mean, like you couldn't get a solid number on how many there are. A lot of those have to be the Betamaxes of cryptocurrencies, right? I mean, like a lot of people have thrown away their money on that stuff. Or am I wrong?
Oh, no. You're 100% right. Betamax actually worked. Actually did something. Right? No, look, to a lot of people in the crypto community, the meme coins, they're an embarrassment. They're an embarrassment. Now, part of that is that...
Can you explain to normies out here listening who don't even know what meme coins are?
Right.
Can you explain to them what they are?
Yeah. So, of course, ironically, our president has one of the biggest ones.
Of course he does. Right?
Yeah. So, look, yeah, it's hard to explain because it's so ridiculous. But a meme coin is like a pet rock. Okay. So you take something which is, totally worthless, and with a little bit of advertising and marketing, you get people excited about it, and people start trading their pet rocks. And that's what they do with the meme coins. And a huge amount of it is that somebody thinks the coin is going to go up. So somebody else buys it thinking that the coin is going up, which makes the coin go up. And somebody else thinks, oh, well, now, there's momentum. Right. So, and these things, they go up really quickly, they go down really quickly. So if you catch it right, you can make a lot of money. Most people, of course, don't catch it right, and they lose money. There's the sharks and the minnows, and the minnows provide the profits, and the sharks take the money. So yeah, a lot of it is gambling. It's speculation and gambling. Now, one reason for that is that the SEC basically made it illegal to create a coin which does something. Okay. Because if it does something, it has some useful purpose, then it's regulated as a security.
Right.
So the SEC said, look, so long as your coin is useless,
right,
and there's no idea of making it do anything, then we can't regulate it. So it's
like those Franklin Mint fake silver dollars. The actual value is just the metal value, right? It's like, and then whatever romantic, imposition you put on the face that's on it. But basically, you're just buying a commodity play there, right? And
yeah,
it's similar like that with meme coins.
It's as if people were buying the Franklin dollar because they wanted to show their support for Franklin.
Right.
Like this is why the Trump dollar, the Trump coin, rockets up. Now, again, you also have to understand that when people say the Trump coin is worth, $20 billion or whatever it is, that's because there's, I don't know how many of these things, there's millions of these things. You could create them, ad infinitum, right?
Right.
And then there's a tiny bit of trade, right? So if you've got some stock of these coins, 100 million of these coins, and one of them trades for $1, then you've got a stock worth 100 million.
Right.
Because if you actually tried to sell that, that the price would plunge to zero. Right. So they're not actually worth that.
It's sort of like, it's amazing. At least once a year, some mainstream news organization will do some piece on asteroid mining, which I'm really in favor of.
Yes.
And they talk about like how it's got so much platinum on it that it's worth $4,200 trillion. As if you actually extracted and put that platinum on the market, the value of platinum wouldn't go down considerably, which is why one of the reasons why you want to mine it, right, is to make platinum cheaper. People don't think about that, but that's sort of the reality of it. All right, so I saw, it's very rare rarely I agree with Ro Khanna about much, but he said that these meme coins, politicians should just be barred from participating in them in any way. That feels right to me, right? I mean, this is a way you talk about, I'm with you. I'm a big James C. Scott fan. I'm with you on the dangers of having everything be legible to the state. But one of the things we want legibility on is the possibilities for bribery and financial corruption of politicians, which is why, you're supposed to put your stuff in a blind trust.
Right.
You're supposed to do all these kinds of things. If you get a situation where you have a president of the United States with a meme coin and all it takes to basically give him X amount of dollars is for some Saudi prince to say, hey, you know what I'll do? I'll do a staggered series of buys to create momentum on your meme coin if you do X for me. And it'll be not totally, but nearly illegible. And it's a way to basically bribe people below the surface. And given that they are digital pet rocks, I'm perfectly fine with the idea that like politicians shouldn't have anything to do with them. Or am I wrong?
Yeah, I mean, we're in a crazy world. If you think about it, if this Trump coin, worth however many $1 billion it is, that could be like the number one reason people want to become president.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And so if we start thinking about who is going to succeed in a world in which you run in order to create a meme coin to make billions of dollars, like what hucksters are really going to succeed?
What's the incentive structure there? Right.
Yeah, that seems like a very bad incentive structure, because the whole point then becomes, how am I going to create enough memes, in order to make money off of this coin when I become president? So, that's a bizarre world.
It does. To me, it feels as rife. The Hunter Biden's art thing, where he was selling his scratchings for $500,000, right? That seems so transparently a form of bribery. And this feels very adjacent to that. But anyway, we don't need to dwell on that. So the other thing about back to crypto. My understanding is that in the United States, at least right now, crypto is largely an investment vehicle, a bet on how it's going to succeed over time. Meanwhile, its real utility is in places like China, Africa, places where you have governments that want you to be as legible as possible so they can take your wealth, or where they're printing currency to inflate away their debts and that kind of stuff. And so there, it is kind of like gold, right? It's a way to hide your money from the regime. It seems to me, though, that like, how to put this? So one of my big arguments with gold bugs over the years is they would say, well, fiat currency is just a social construct, and it doesn't actually have any innate worth, and blah 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 blah. And my response was, well, what do you think gold is? I mean, like, if the zombie apocalypse came tomorrow, no one would be walking around with satchels full of gold, right? They'd be walking around with satchels full of water or ammo or that kind of stuff, right? In the same way that they wouldn't be walking around with cash. And so can you just explain to me like the inherent value of the Bitcoin?
Right.
It's still a bet on the sustainability of the global economic system, right?
Yeah. So, and interestingly, there's a few ironies here, because, the original impetus behind crypto was to replace the dollar, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yet the most successful crypto product, the one which really seems to have found, product market fit and is performing a useful service, are stable coins.
Mm-hmm.
And a stable coin is a digital dollar,
Right.
And so actually the most successful crypto product is supporting the dollar. Because how do you create a stable coin? Well, you create a stable coin by saying this token is always going to be worth $1. Mm-hmm. And how do you prove that? Well, you prove that by saying, well, look, in our bank account, we're holding these dollars, or better yet, we're holding US treasuries.
Mhm.
Okay. And so actually the stable coins are now a small but modest but significant holder of U.S. Treasuries. Stable coins are now holding more U.S. Treasuries than like Mexico. They're like 1/10 Japan or
Mhm.
China, but they're growing. And stable coins are holding something like $140 billion, worth of U.S. Treasuries. So the stable coins are actually helping the U.S. dollar. And you're exactly right that there's some irony in Trump policies, but in crypto more generally, in that the one of the best uses of these stable coins is to increase trade,
Mhm.
is to lower the transactions cost of trade, to make it much more easier to trade across the world. So, on the one hand, you're promoting crypto, on the other hand, you're saying, well, we want to have all these tariffs and reduce trade. They're kind of running a little bit at cross purposes because crypto does well when the global economy does well.
Right.
You're exactly right that you know when inflation went up, Bitcoin went down.
Right.
you know and it's when interest rates are low and the economy is doing well, that's when crypto also does well. It's like a tech stock. It's correlated with the US economy and with the global economy. And so I think the best case for crypto is not the one which Satoshi Nakamoto would originally have said. It's you want this when everything collapses.
Right.
No, the best case for crypto is to improve the global transactions framework and increase globalization and U.S. growth, and that's the best case.
Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting when I discovered that crypto's actually turned out to be very helpful for Ukraine and very difficult for Russia. And that is
Right,
not the
right.
prediction you would have made, back in the day. All right, so last thing on crypto before we move to AI.
Mm,
This idea of a national strategic crypto reserve or whatever we're supposed to call it, right?
yeah,
Again, I'm functioning with a high degree of ignorance a lot of these things, but our friend Cliff Asness, whose economic instincts I trust a great deal, going just purely by his Twitter account, thinks this is bat guano crazy.
yeah,
And moreover, I just think as a political analysis, this is my take on it, but as a matter of political analysis, it's kind of like the meme coin thing. You get the federal government to buy this asset that all of your biggest donors hold. And it's sort of like Goldfinger, right? Goldfinger didn't want to steal gold from Fort Knox. He wanted to irradiate it to take it off the market for a century, which would make all the remaining stockpiles of gold much more valuable, right? The idea that you would create this reserve and then ever dip into it, which would lower the value of what your biggest donors wanted you to increase the value of, seems unlikely to me. And so it just seems to me like a subsidy by proxy for the crypto industry. And the advocates of it don't even really seem to be hiding that. Is there a good economic case for it? I mean, I get a gold reserve, but we don't have one the same way that we used to, thanks to Nixon. But like, what do you think about it? What's the best case for it?
yeah. So I think it's worse than you say because
I was trying to be kind because I honestly
Yeah.
didn't know where you came down on it.
Right,
I wanted to
no.
cover my bets.
yeah. Because there's no real case for a gold reserve, right?
Fair enough.
Like,
I just said I get the case for it.
Yeah. I mean, the gold is no longer tied to the dollars; it's just sitting there.
Right.
It's we should sell some of that and use it for something, right? We don't need the U.S. is the reserve currency. We don't need to have gold, and we don't need Bitcoin either. And the I mean, the ironies abound because as I pointed out. Crypto does well when the economy does well, not when it does poorly. And the best crypto is the dollar, the stable coins, right? Which again is the opposite of what they thought. And of course now they're pinning their hopes on the government, buying crypto, which doesn't make any sense. And to just stretch the irony even further, um, the reason why the U.S. government actually owns a fair chunk of Bitcoin is because they got it when they prosecuted people who stole the Bitcoin from Mt. Gox, right? And there's I don't know if you ever seen the whole story of these people who stole the money from Mt. Gox involves this rapper Rafflekin or whatever her name is. This is crazy. Yeah. Anyway, it involves bizarre, weird, strange people, and that the U.S. ended up getting a bunch of Bitcoin, and now they don't know what to do with it.
Huh.
I think Trump will probably just hold on to it for his term. I think he probably won't build a Bitcoin reserve. There is no reason to do that, but to satisfy some people, he won't sell the Bitcoin that the government has. But yeah, there's no reason. There's no reason to hold.
Okay, that's
for the U.S. to hold.
I'm glad that my prior is confirmed. That's helpful. All right,
so cheese. That's another question.
Okay, so now let's just
talk about AI.
The guy at the wedding, right? And again, I understand AI a little bit better, but like, the guy at the wedding says, "All right, this AI thing. What the hell's up with that? What is your basic rundown on that?"
No one knows, but quite possibly the way I put it is that we are in the intelligence revolution in exactly the same way that we had the Industrial Revolution. And yet, if you ask economists, like, when did the Industrial Revolution occur? It's like somewhere between like 1600 and like 1900, right?
Yeah.
So it's a long process. The intelligence revolution is happening much, much more quickly. And we have made, silicon and things like that think. And I want to be clear, because the AIs, they pass the Turing test. They are creative. They are doing real thinking. This is not that they are grabbing something off the internet and just, pretending to think. That's not what's going on. We have created real thinking machines. And what the implications of that are, they're very big, and I don't exclude the Overton window has just gotten so large. I don't exclude there are the doomsters who think that AI is going to, lead to the extinction of humanity. There are the boomsters who think that AI is going to, even in the next few years, double human lifespan and increase economic growth rates, by a factor of 10 or more. And I do not exclude either of those. I think they're both low probability. I think somewhere we'll muddle along in the middle, but I don't exclude either of those possibilities, because the implications of creating thinking machines are really very large, and we just do not have good intuition or analysis or insight into the social ramifications of what is going on.
So in the meaty part of that distribution, right, the most likely part, where do you see the most likely? I mean, it's very easy for me to predict all sorts of dislocations, and it's very easy to pick some sort of low-hanging fruit benefits. But like, where do you think are the most likely benefits worthy of celebrating, and the most likely problems worthy of creating some hedges against now?
So,
like, if it's Skynet, we know we should just kill it, right?
Yeah.
If it's definitely going to be Skynet, we should kill it now. I don't think it is. You don't think it is. That's fine.
Right.
And if we think it's 100% likely that we are going to have jetpacks and replicators from Star Trek and transporter beams, we should just let it run wild, right? But so, like, in the middle, like where
yeah. So I think we have to see, because none of this has happened yet. So we're going to learn more as it happens, but it is going to happen very, very quickly. In the middle, I think the true test will be whether how quickly the AIs are able to advance the frontier of human knowledge. So right now, the AIs have basically absorbed more or less all of human knowledge. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but they're essentially expert level, PhD level on any topic you ask them. Okay. I spent a lot of time quizzing the AI on economics,
Mm-hmm.
and it's PhD level, like the most advanced models. Okay. And that is also true in most fields. Now, whether the question then becomes whether the AI can advance the frontier. And one thing which people argue, okay, is that we saw, for example, with the chess models, okay, for a long time, the chess models, they didn't go very far because we tried to program them algorithmically.
Mm-hmm.
This is what you should do in this situation when the pawn is here and the king is here. This is the kind of thing that you should do. Give it a whole bunch of rules. What eventually worked with, AlphaSeq, okay, was we're just going to tell the AI what wins, what a win means, grabbing the queen, okay? And then we're going to have the AI play millions and millions of games against itself, okay? And this so-called reinforcement learning. And the AI basically, in a matter of, days, played more chess games than have been played in the entire human history. And it became a better chess player than any human chess player, right? The AI can beat, Magnus Carlsen, no problem. Okay. Now, if it is possible to do that same thing with physics, okay, with, mathematics, then the AI is very quickly going to achieve Nobel Prize winning, levels. And that's the open question, I think, is whether this reinforcement learning is able to create super intelligences. And we are going to find that out maybe in the next 5 years, maybe sooner. And so we will have a situation, quite possibly, not 100%, but quite possibly, in which AIs win Nobel Prizes, or the equivalent. And yeah, that if we can do that, then economic growth rates can increase a huge amount, because once you've got one AI that can do that, you've got a billion of them.
Right.
So, a billion von Neumanns. That is going to be a big deal.
So just so I understand the point that you're making on the chess, a lot of AI for normal people is basically just a plagiarism machine, right? It reads everything and then it gives you the best, most plausible writing of what other people have already written. And so it's I don't mean to be dismissive, but it's garbage in, garbage out. If it's very high quality garbage, then you get very high quality garbage out. But the base knowledge of the thing, the whatever the base terms, are defined by human beings. And so like a friend of mine who does this briefing on AI, he pointed out that like when it comes to things about general politics and whatnot, when you ask ChatGPT or any of these things, the answers tend to be the answers you'd expect from your typical Silicon Valley type, sort of libertarian tinged social liberal stuff. The question I have is about the chess. Did the AI machines come up with new gambits or maneuvers that have never been seen before? Or did they just have, because they have total and perfect recall of past games, did they just pick the best maneuver already been done, right? And maybe there are no maneuvers left. Similar, so like when you say create Nobel Prize winning stuff, are they creating truly new knowledge or discovering truly new knowledge? Or are they just basically filtering existing knowledge and applying it best as possible?
Yeah. No question, the chess AI created entirely novel strategies, which humans had never thought of before. And the same thing is true with Go. There's a remarkable documentary about Lee Sedol, who was the human champion, Go champion, and he was blown away by the AlphaSeq playing Go, and it was like a marvel to him, a miracle to him, because it was playing moves which he had never seen before, which were completely novel, and which took him a long time to understand. And this is the world's number one, player, but undisputed. And it just blew him away. And so the question is now, look, chess and Go, chess especially, but and also Go, but like there's a limited, it's a limited system, right? The limited number of rules is that follow the rules, and physics is much more open, economics much more open, much more complicated. But I don't see. I'm not a computer scientist. I'm not on the super cutting edge of this, but I don't see any reason why the same reinforcement learning techniques could not create a AI which is just as original, just as creative as the ones which were doing chess and Go. I think that's just probably just a matter of time, and that's what most of the AI researchers that I talk to, that's what most of them think. This is truly intelligent. It is not just a stochastic parrot. That we have created something, incredible.
So, sort of to bring it back around to where we started, there was this video going around. I only saw the video that was on Twitter. For all I know, the larger context is more redeeming. But Larry Ellison was making this case about how everyone will be on their best behavior in a AI monitored society because there will be cameras everywhere and it'll be great and no one blah, 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 blah. And he clearly didn't understand how creepy he sounded. And, one of my, there are a lot of people who, technocracy is this idea that's very old, sort of as we were talking about before, this idea that just let the experts run everything and it'll be fine. I do not put it past a lot of people to say that in the very near future, we should let AI machines run government. Right? And I don't want to foreclose the idea that that may not be a terrible idea in some very constrained circumstances that I can't imagine right now and all that kind of stuff. But that desire for super intelligence is making best optimal decisions that take political and moral responsibility out of humans' hands is very strong with a lot of people. Are you concerned about the sort of golden calf problem that we could have down the road with all of this?
Of course. I mean, to turn it to my own field, economics, the argument which people always say, well, now that we have AI, we can have communism, right? Because the AI is smart enough,
to distribute resources the right way.
That Hayek stuff, limited knowledge, that applied for human beings, but the AI, can overcome that. And I think that's wrong. I think that's wrong because there will be multiple AIs, right? So the one thing the AIs cannot do, is perfectly understand one another and all of how the AIs interact, because that's a system itself which is more complicated than any AI alone can understand. So, we're going to have businesses will have AIs, consumers will have AIs. It'll be ubiquitous. Wherever we go, there'll be, as I said, I call it the intelligence revolution. Intelligence will be everywhere. Everything you touch, everything that you see, there'll be some intelligences there. And that whole system will be much more Hayekian, than it will be Marxian in terms of being able to control it all. So I don't think we'll see central planning. It doesn't improve the argument for central planning. Should we use AI in government? Of course. Of course, there's lots of places where, we could benefit from it as a mediating influence.
In government, I'm okay with. To govern is the question, right?
Yeah. I mean, right. So I'm not. I mean, we'll see. It's open, but I have this argument with my wife. Okay, when we're driving somewhere, and I say, just listen to Google, follow the directions, okay? And she said, no, this route is quicker. Do this, right? So I so I'm like a follow the AI guy.
Yeah.
Because at least when it comes to managing my own life, I appreciate that I don't have to think about the best way to get somewhere. I just listen to the AI. I think people who can do that will have some benefits.
So this is an interesting example because I have a similar argument at home. My wife hates Waze and likes to use Google Maps, which I think is the sort of vanilla navigation system, right?
Okay.
But where I concede that Waze is bad is that it has in its algorithm, it takes into account traffic cameras and will take you on a path away from the traffic cameras. And the thing is, if you know where the traffic cameras are, it's still better to take the faster route where the traffic cameras are. Just slow down when you see the traffic cameras.
Right.
Similarly, Google Maps, for a while, it became very difficult not to have it on the environmental setting, right? Where like best fuel consumption.
Yeah. I hate that.
Just infuriating.
Yeah, infuriating.
The danger of letting AI run these systems is you start getting people wanting to govern. You start getting those externalities factored into best practices in ways that you lack the agency to combat. Right? It's like you have no choice but to do the fuel efficient route. You have no choice but to go, the way that is best for the whole of society. Some people are very comfortable with that. I don't think you are.
Right.
And I think that's where the arguments are going to be.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. But I also think that the problem is not Orwell. The problem is Huxley, by which I mean, where have the AIs so far been most successful? It's like TikTok, okay? Like TikTok just feeds you this constant set of dopamine hits, or Facebook reels. I'm not taking a position on, China and TikTok or anything like that. It just feeds it. The AI knows incredibly well how to feed you content which you're going to respond to, right? It is like, I'm sure you've seen the pictures of the people in Las Vegas and they're just mindlessly pulling, the slot machine. Well, we just magnify that many, many times and think about how advertisers and firms and so forth are going to be using AIs to just grab attention. That seems to me to be the social media, amped up with AI. That seems to me to be, the real danger here. Not so much that it's going to plan our lives, but it's going to make our lives just so full of these dopamine hits that we won't be in control any longer.
Well, that's the irony, right? Is before you said to people talking about AI proving the case for communism, the world you just described, which I think has a high level of coherence with reality, that's basically the Frankfurt School's argument about capitalism, right? Is that it manufactures false luxuries, it makes people think they're necessities, in order to constrain people and make them servants of the system. And that's basically what you're kind of describing AI can do. I do want to, I know I've kept you long and I got to go lie down, but you mentioned before, and it's something I wanted to ask you earlier. So you mentioned before the people who think that AI is rendering Hayek irrelevant about the knowledge problem and all of that, right? I generally agree with your take on that, or at least that's where my sympathies lie. It's another argument for not having digital dollars, right? Because that makes everything much more legible to AI, in effect, right? But my question is something a little different. Is that, so like the knowledge problem thing, which is sort of central to your political philosophy and very close to center of mine, right? And it's an argument that the right has been making in one form or another. Let's say prior to 2015, the right was making constantly, right? It's like, there's a bit of it in Buckley's I'd rather the first 2,000 names in the Boston phone book thing, right? It is the essence of Tom Sowell's writing. It's the essence of Milton Friedman. And it gets to this point of, for most of my life, when you called someone a conservative economist, you were basically calling them a libertarian economist. I mean, Friedrich List notwithstanding or something, right? I mean, in the 20th century, you were talking about Tom Sowell, you were talking about, Milton Friedman, you were talking about, people like you, even though like when you say a conservative economist, people who were in the know understood that didn't necessarily mean they were socially conservative or anything. But the conservative movement and the libertarians basically shared the same idols when it came to actual real living economists.
Yeah.
And that's change, right? And so like I've found myself in the last 10 years now encountering more and more people who want to say, in effect, oh, that knowledge problem thing, right? That you'll never have enough information. That was true about progressives. But conservatives can do it the right way, right?
Yeah.
Like Marco Rubio literally wrote a piece called "In Favor of Industrial Policy, comma, done right."
Yeah.
As if like, oh, we didn't think about that. It's not that it can't be done. We just didn't think we should just do it right, right? You know. And I'm wondering for you, just sort of sociologically and professionally, has it been weird that all of a sudden to see these people who weren't necessarily your complete political allies or anything, but they were in terms of most policy things, taxes, trade, right? Basically on the same team. Like professionally, you could talk to them and be pretty straightforward. And now all of a sudden to see the Republican Party and a lot of big chunks of conservative economic thought basically become statist, but with sort of nationalist colorings. Is it weird to you? Do you feel vindicated because you thought it was always there? Like what is your sense of it?
Yeah, I mean, I feel frozen out more than ever before, which has some benefits in that I feel
it's liberating.
Yeah, it's liberating, right?
Yeah.
I don't have to kowtow or be kind to, either side. I feel like, it's a rare day when I am not accused of being both a conservative and a liberal, right? Right. So, yeah, it's disappointing. Since the ideas are correct, I suspect that there will be a return. We are more tribal than I thought. I think we talked about this when we talked about vaccines a few years ago when we talked like it's amazing to me that people would turn down a vaccine, on tribal political reasons.
Yeah.
That shook me, and we're seeing the same thing and, a bunch of debates now about immigration and things like that. I hope we'll have a return, but, well, I mean, it's called the remnant for a reason, right?
That's right. No, I mean, yeah, I mean, what I tell people is I've never been more politically homeless, yet more ideologically grounded.
Yes.
Because I have permission to abandon any position that I didn't want to hold, right. And it would help me join some team. But I don't want to. And so but it's particularly just like, it's particularly weird in your profession, right? I mean, because like libertarian economic, free market, let's call it free market economics,
right,
was the essence of what conservative economics was. And I would argue that's because conservatives are about conserving, to a large extent, classical liberalism and American culture. And American culture is liberal, right?
Yes.
It is capitalist. And to have that just sort of all swept aside is really disorienting for me. And I just, in your world, like, it's not like, let me put it this way. Do you see progressives in the whole sort of seesaw effect of American politics when one side is against something, the other side suddenly becomes for it?
Yeah.
Do you see any hope that progressives will become an actual liberal party in terms of economics anytime soon?
I do, actually. Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson have this book coming out. I think it's called The Abundance Agenda. There's this progress kind of studies movement, which Tyler Cowen, my co-author, has put forward. And, it's all about getting rid of a lot of government regulation, being pro-energy, right? Whatever type of energy, whether it's nuclear, wind, solar, being pro-energy, making government move faster. Ezra Klein had me on his show to talk about Mansur Olson, right?
Yeah.
And that was remarkable. All credit to Ezra, for doing that. He's doing the work, if I can put it that way. And Mansur Olson is all about the rise and decline of nations and how interest groups, accumulate and gum up the system, and all of these legal lawsuits and so forth slow things down. It's incredible how we can't build a subway in the United States anymore, or a dam, and so I think both actually on the left and on the right, we'll see how long Elon Musk lasts, in the administration. It's very difficult for me to see how Trump can withstand somebody else in the room getting the spotlight. But so we'll see how Elon lasts. But Elon is not, Elon understands the arguments for trade and all that. He understands Hayek and all stuff like that. He's pro-progress. He wants to get to Mars. So right. I think there is a resurgence of the United States has been somewhat moribund. Productivity growth has been low. We don't want to become Britain. Okay. People are looking at Great Britain and, Italy and say, GDP per capita has not increased in Italy for like 25 years.
Yeah.
And I think Americans are saying, no, we don't want that. And, we talked about at the beginning of the show, the U.S. is pulling away from Europe. And I think there's kind of a little bit of pride there. And there is a part of the left, a part of the liberal left, as I said, the Ezra Klein, Derek Thompson, which is looking more about how we can have more efficient government. Now, they want more efficient government ultimately to create a better welfare state, or at least that's part of it. Okay. But I'm not so hot on that, but I could live with it. I can live with the welfare state so long as we allow Elon Musk, to build SpaceX.
Right.
That's kind of a deal that I would be sort of willing to make. Even Ayn Rand, she doesn't complain too much about John Galt being taxed, right? It's John Galt not being able and Hank Reeder not being able to build Reeder and metal. That's the real problem. So, yeah, I think there's some room for some optimism there, Jonah.
Yeah, I mean, Virginia Postrel, her beef with Ezra is that Ezra wants to remove the regulations on government being able to do things, not necessarily the private sector being able to do things. And I would rather the emphasis be put on the regulations on the private sector, but it's progress to be against the things that keep government from doing the things it's supposed to do well. So
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's frustrating when the government cannot build a simple subway, right? I mean, that's outrageous, right? Or a highway. There's something to be said for building these public goods, if only because they make capitalism work better.
All right, my friend, you're generous with your time. We went long, and I was less incoherent than I feared I would be, which is not to say I wasn't incoherent. But thank you very much for doing this, and I hope you'll come back.
Always a pleasure, Jonah.
Thank you.